Welcome to Avatar State of Mind, a podcast exclusively dedicated to the universe of Avatar The Last Airbender. From The Last Airbender to The Legend of Korra, the comic books, the Kyoshi novels, this is your number one stop for Avatar content. My name is Sam DeCoste, and I'm joined by Aaron Miller to spend the next 30 minutes with you talking about the Avatar universe. From the Northern Water Tribe to Ba Sing Se and Zuko's honor, of course, we've got you covered. This is Avatar State of Mind. We're back at Avatar State of Mind. This is episode 8 of the podcast. Very exciting stuff. Aaron, here we are. It's 11:20 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and here we are recording this podcast. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm very sorry that we have to do this now. I'm actually going to be out of town this weekend, so I forced Sam to do this right now. But he's always happy to talk about Avatar, so this works out.
It's just fine to me. So we will continue our series-long recap of Avatar The Last Airbender by spending each episode talking about individual chapters. We'll break down every chapter of Avatar The Last Airbender in order from books 1 to 3, from The Boy and the Iceberg to Sozin's Comet. Previously on the podcast, we talked about the waterbending scroll and Jet. That was, if you haven't listened to it yet, a brilliant discussion. You should definitely check it out. That's one of our best episodes yet. Next up is episodes 11 and 12, The Great Divide and the Storm. Before you listen any longer, let this be your spoiler warning. Do not listen to the show today unless you have watched the first 12 episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender, but ideally you watched the whole show by this point.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say this episode, specifically about The Great Divide, will include a lot of spoilers about both of the Kyoshi novels. Sam and I basically came together and said that this episode itself was kind of boring. We were actually tempted to actually skip this episode and talking about The Great Divide just because it doesn't really influence the series at all. But I convinced him to let me talk about it in relation to both of the Kyoshi novels, The Rise of Kyoshi and The Shadow of Kyoshi. So if you do not want to hear spoilers from those novels, please skip to the halfway mark in this podcast.
And as Aaron was saying, The Great Divide, before you stop tuning in, because I advise that you keep tuning in because there is a lot of great lore about the Avatar universe in this podcast. The Great Divide is the most obsolete and least valuable episode of the series because in the bigger picture, it has zero meaning. You could take this episode out of the program and it would not affect the story in any sense of the matter. But we said we were going to go over every single chapter, and we want to cover the lore of the universe, and this is the appropriate starting place for us, we believe. So let's talk about the episode very briefly. It's a ripoff of the Grand Canyon. That's pretty clear, especially when you look at and watch the episode. The largest canyon in the world, very beautiful canyon, but pretty obsolete in the Avatar universe. Even in Korra, we never see this work. We never see this location ever again. But we do see these two tribes at the forefront who have been uprooted by the Fire Nation and now have to seek refuge in Ba Sing Se, which is the Earth Kingdom capital that the series keeps flirting with, even though it's only episode 11 and they don't go to Ba Sing Se for a very long time. That is still something we consider. And they both have to cross the canyon to get to Ba Sing Se. The tribes are called the Zhangs and the Ganjens, and there are canyon crawlers there, and there's a backstory with how these tribes interact. Aaron, should I begin with a discussion about how the tribes were at odds in Avatar The Last Airbender, and then you branch off into Kyoshi?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And before you do that, I just want to point out that this is the first time that Ba Sing Se is mentioned in the show. Am I correct with that?
It's not the first time. We talk about it with Iroh when he was invading 600 Days. That was 4 episodes ago, but is one of the very first that we're hearing about it. And it's the second time that the characters are intending to go there, at least, but not Team Avatar specifically.
And this also mentions how large the Earth Kingdom is. I believe it was the Ganjins who said that they were traveling thousands of miles from their home to Ba Sing Se, and their home was in the Earth Kingdom. So just from one city to the other in the same kingdom, thousands of miles, that's just insane.
And we know the Avatar map. Ba Sing Se is northeast on the map. and we know that they're traveling from the South Pole to the North Pole, and they're not in the north at this point. They're probably towards the middle of the map right now, and so that puts into picture just how far these tribes have had to walk. Who knows how long they've already walked to this point. It shows how long the journey really is to Ba Sing Se, and it probably magnifies a similar journey that a lot of Earth Kingdom tribes have to go through. People that have been uprooted by the Fire Nation trying to seek refuge in the safest city in the world. But anyways, let's get to the story of the Ganjens and the Zhangs, because that is the foundation of the Great Divide. So there are two sides of the story. I'll start with the Ganjen side of the story. There was this great man named Jin Wei, who was an earthbender warrior assigned to transport a sacred orb from the Great Eastern Gate to the Great Western Gate, fulfilling a tribe's ancient redemption ritual. But he was attacked by Wei Jin from the Zhang tribe, and he stole the sacred orb. And that's the Ganjen side of the story. The Zhang side of the story is that Wei Jin was leaving the Western Gate out of the village and noticed a Ganjen man collapsed on the ground and badly hurt, and he dropped his orb. Jin Wei requested that the sacred orb be transported back to his tribe, not even attend to his medical needs, just go back to his tribe and deliver the sacred orb as soon as he could. And then Wei Jin did, but he was arrested and thrown in jail for 20 years. And so this conflict from two different stories is the premises of a century-old feud. The storyline surrounding this in the Great Divide episode is pretty obsolete. So, Aaron, how about you take it away with how Kyoshi is intertwined with this tribe rivalry?
Yeah, of course. And before I do that, if I had to choose either one of these stories you just mentioned to be like the correct one, I think I would have to say the Zhang story is probably the most accurate. I did a lot of like Reddit searching and like deep diving into all the subreddits I'm a part of, and it just makes sense for the Zhang's telling of the story to be the one that's true. However, I do believe I know the exact reason of this this clash between tribes, and it has nothing to do with this like weird story that Aang had to basically fake to make them stop fighting.
And that was documented. It was a lie. Aang lied to get the tribes to get along at the end.
So just to give a little bit of background on both of these tribes. So back in Kyoshi's time, this was the 4th century before the Air Temple genocide. So just to set everything in pace, in the real world, we declare time based on BCE and ACE, before Common Era and after Common Era. In the Avatar universe, we determine it by before genocide and after genocide. The year 0 is the year that Fire Lord Sozin destroyed the air nomads. That's year 0. So 4 centuries, 400 years before this was the time of Kyoshi. And Kyoshi's earth-bending master, his name was Jianzu. And he was also the earthbending teacher of Kuruk. He was a really good friend of Kuruk. They were born around the same time.
That would be Avatar Kuruk.
Avatar Kuruk, yeah. He was the waterbending avatar before Kyoshi. And as Sam and I know, and I'll tell you, the listeners now, if you don't know, Kuruk died when he was 33 years old. In the show, he said that in previous episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender, we discovered that Kuruk lived like this just like carefree life, and he died because of that, but that's not true. Kyoshi novels get into that. I don't want to spoil too much. However, Jianzu, he was a very, very powerful Earth Kingdom noble. He was basically the most powerful man in the Earth Kingdom, even above the Earth King. This like guy had so much money, and of course he was a Ganjin. Because in this show, the Ganjins are depicted as like this high class, thinking they're above everybody and all this stuff, which is exactly what Jianzu was. So tying the Zhangs into this, in the 4th century before the genocide, there was a major plot to murder Jianzu. This was when Kyoshi was around 18 years old. This plot was to basically unseat the official leader of the Earth Kingdom. I'm putting official in quotes because Jianzu really wasn't the leader. The Earth Kingdom was. The Earth King was. So this is kind of crazy. So to tie everything into the show, there's this character named Chamberlain Hue, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He was the assistant to the Beifong family. Beifongs being Toph's family, because the Beifongs go way back, thousands of years back. And this Chamberlain guy, I'll call him, he organized a dinner where the plan was to basically murder Jianzu. And one of the members of this plot was Zhang Daku, the original founder of the Zhang clan. So, of course, Jianzu being super smart, having all of his connections, he actually found out about this plan, and every single person who was involved in trying to kill him, he killed. So, this is the first case of a Ganjin murdering a Zhang because of a plan that was previously set into place. So if I had to guess, and this is a very, very educated guess based on everything I just said, this moment in time right now really set these two clans against each other, because it was basically the leader of one against the leader of the other, and one of them died.
So that's the real foundation of the hatred between the Ganjins and the Zhangs.
Yeah, that was a lot of information to unpack, and I really hope I made it make sense.
I think you did. But it's a 400-year division then. This is made out to be a century old in the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. Because Aang lies and says that he knew Wei Jin and Jin Wei when he was a kid, before he went into the iceberg. I just think it's amazing that even something as minor and so detailed as these two tribes in the Great Divide, in the most meaningless episode of The Last Airbender, still ties back to these novels that date back 400 years before this took place.
And if I also had to guess about the creation of this episode by itself, I don't think of these episodes were made in 2005, 2006, and these novels just came out in like 2018 and this past summer 2020. I don't think that the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender even knew about this history that was going to be established, because the novels are actually written by somebody outside of the two creators. So honestly, I think that there was such like there was no information at all within this episode itself. So the creators were like, please give this a backstory so it doesn't look too bad of an episode.
And we won't really delve into the episode much longer. I just think it's kind of funny how the tribe members during the battle against the canyon crawlers are pretty useless. They can't bend, they can't fight, they can't do anything. They just put everyone in danger by deciding to bring food into the canyon, even though the tour guide said that you cannot, because it will attract those canyon crawlers. I'm not sure if you know anything more about the rivalry or anything about the tribes themselves, if most of them can't bend, or if they're pretty useless, or they don't know how to, engage in combat. I'm not sure if that came up in the novels.
So Jianzu himself was a master earthbender. He was able to basically turn like earth into blades. And he, in the novels are actually super, super graphic. Like Jianzu himself, like he sends these blades of stone through people's necks and just kills them in cold blood. And he does this to many people, and the actions he takes in the novels, I don't want to get too specific, but the actions he takes are just so ruthless. And if you're an Avatar fan who is a little bit older and you want to see like the dark side of the Avatar universe, I definitely recommend to read these novels. But relating to the tribes themselves and them being benders, they didn't really say much. But all I can say is that Jianzu was he was such a powerful bender. However, the Zhang who Jianzu killed was not a bender. So I wonder if that means that the Ganjins are natural benders and the Zhangs are not. I don't know, but we can just infer that from basically the first one.
I would say that's pretty much everything we needed to cover in this episode. It's not much of a noteworthy episode, so we're not going to bore you with the synopsis, but I thought that the lore of Kyoshi would be appropriate, and it would show you what this podcast can give you that you might not be able to get from other podcasts. So thank you, Aaron, for that recap, because I haven't read the Kyoshi novels myself yet, so that's definitely a fascinating intersection between the Great Divide and an event that happened 400 years ago in the era of Kyoshi. But let's talk about the storm, because the storm is chapter 12, and this is pivotal in establishing the backstories of Avatar Aang and Prince Zuko. The episode begins with Aang in a nightmare, riding Appa, gliding with Sokka and Katara, and he sees Gyatso saying, "We need you, Aang." everyone is saying, "We need you, Aang. Why did you disappear?" And then it's Aang drowning, and then he wakes up. And then we talk about a storm is coming. The episode begins, Aang looking at the sky saying, "What a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. It's going to be a great day." And then we pivot to Zuko and Iroh on the ship. And Iroh says, "There's a storm coming, a big one." He knew there was a storm coming. And so did the fisherman's wife when they were at the market talking to the Avatar, Katara, and Sokka. I'm curious, and I'm sure you don't have the answer to this, Aaron. I don't think anybody does. How do you forecast weather in this series?
Honestly, I think Iroh and the fisherman's wife knew this was happening, knew this was going to come because of, one, their age, and with their age comes experience with all of this stuff. But when I said that, you can also pose the question, why didn't the fishermen also know about the storm? Well, you can answer that by saying him, like Sokka, are very, very arrogant. They're very ignorant of what other people say, and they always think what they think is right, and they always want the best. So honestly, I just think that it was a prediction made by smart people. So
the fisherman's wife credited her joints, which is a weird way of putting it. It's probably the creator's way of covering their backs, but
it's a way of, honestly, like my grandparents say they can feel weather coming from their joints. So it's like an old people thing, I guess.
There you go. But also, no clouds in sight, no wind, no nothing. It fascinates me how even then, in a beautiful day like that, Iroh can foresee a horrible storm. So then we go back to the market, and the fisherman is yelling at Aang when he discovers that he's the Avatar. And he yells at him for abandoning the world. He disappeared for 100 years and turned his back on the world. And Aang retreats because he feels guilty and thinks that he's right. And then Katara follows him, leaving behind Sokka to go do his job with the fisherman. And then Aang goes to a secluded cave, and then Aang opens up to Katara about what happened when he was at the air temple, and he discovered that he was the Avatar, and his life changed forever. The monks told him that Aang was the Avatar at age 12, 4 years earlier than he should have been told, but the monks told Aang that storm clouds are forming, war is upon the world very soon. We don't know what. They didn't say that the Fire Nation is going to attack. They said that there is going to be a war, and that the world needs Aang sooner than Aang might be ready to serve the world. And we also learn how avatars are identified. The trick of choosing the 4 avatar relics. When he was a child, he picked the 4 toys that all avatars played with as well. And I think it's a fascinating way of identifying avatars, by the way. That's the metric to find out how one person can bend all 4 elements every generation.
Yeah, and just to tie this back to the Kyoshi novels as well, do you remember one of the toys on the mat? It looked like a clay doll. Do you remember seeing that? That clay doll is the way that the elders, or not the elders, but like the people who determined the Avatar, discovered that Kyoshi was the Avatar. That same clay doll. That clay doll actually belonged to Avatar Yang Chen, the airbending Avatar before Kyoshi. And then after the airbending Avatar after Yang Chen was, of course, Aang. So it's very interesting that he liked the belonging of his past life, who was also an airbender.
And the Aang story continues to develop. We see Monk Gyatso, and we learn more about his special bond with Aang. We knew that they had a special bond going back to the Southern Air Temple when Aang discovered that he was dead, that he was killed by the Fire Nation. We see them playing Pai Sho. We see another master trying to take Aang to train him, and sensing a rift that maybe Gyatso is trying to look out for Aang while the monks are just trying to make sure he is the best airbender he can be. Also, we see Aang airbend this whole show. He is a fantastic airbender. He is a master at age 12, and yet they're still training him. And when you watch him airbend, I don't think there's anything missing from his game.
No, definitely not. Like maybe power, like just strength of his airbending, but I mean, we do see instances where his power is just awesome. So,
Yeah, and I think you just said that's nitpicking. If we're looking for something to criticize, that's just nitpicking.
yeah. Now, do you remember I believe this was one of your trivia questions in our very first podcast. You remember how he got his tattoos, right? What he did to get them? So, him creating the air scooter is what got him his tattoos.
Oh, okay.
And he's actually the youngest airbender ever to become a master. And do you remember in the beginning of this episode, Aang is teaching the air scooter to like all of his friends, and his friends are like, "Oh, where'd you learn that from?" But don't you think his friends would have known where he learned it from? Because that's why he was all tatted up. Like, I just found that a little bit interesting.
That's a good point. But then we move on to when Aang overhears Gyatso being lectured by the monks decide that Gyatso must be separated from Aang, that Aang would be sent to the Eastern Air Temple to complete his airbending training. I don't know how much training there is, considering he's the best airbender of his generation, that's for sure. But for Aang, at the moment of the episode as he's reciting this story to Katara, as far as he's concerned, this probably happened 3 weeks ago. This happened 100 years ago, but for all he knows, this happened just a few weeks ago.
The way that I have always thought of this, thought of like when he left the Southern Air Temple. So he left during a big storm. And we also see a big storm in the present time being this episode. And so the way that I always imagined this is big storms happen in a specific season. So I always imagined that Aang left the Southern Air Temple around the same season that the storm episode takes place. Meaning that because Sozin attacked in the end of the summer because he attacked with the comet, meaning that he was in the iceberg in his time for like 4 months, 3 months maybe. Just because if you relate when he went into the iceberg to being around the time of the storm and then the time between the storm and the comet being that distance.
I think you also have to account for geography. He was at the South Pole, flying from the Air Temple, and then he ended up in the South Pole. So, and now where they are now, they're probably in the middle of the world. So the weather patterns could definitely be different. Talking about different hemispheres in the Avatar universe as well.
That's very true.
And I definitely think he ran away during the summer. I assume that. I assume it was in the nick of time before the comet. I have no reason to back that up, but...
Well, to back up what you just said, it does make a lot of sense because the air nomads, all 5 of the masters in the Southern Air Temple, realized something was coming. And I don't think they would have realized something was coming months beforehand. So it actually makes a lot of sense for them to only see it like a few months in advance. Obviously, like they're not Jedi, so they can't like see the future, but they probably noticed and from their allies noticed that ships were organizing and all this stuff. And obviously Sozin wasn't stupid, so he would only organize warships a few weeks before the attack.
What I find so significant about the concept that Aang probably believes this happened a few weeks ago is that he's still not over it. He's still not over the fact that the monks tried to separate him from his mentor, his best friend, and he was angry and confused, and he's still angry and confused. And so he ran away. And then Gyatso discovered that he did, and he read a letter that Aang wrote, but he ran away during a storm. And then the storm caught him up. Aang and Appa almost drowned, but then Aang saved them by bending an iceberg. And then the next thing he knew, after maybe, I don't know, a 10-hour nap, maybe, he woke up in the arms of Katara 100 years later, and his people were wiped out, which is remarkable. But Aang felt like he turned his back on the world. But Katara tells him, if you stayed, you probably would have been killed during Sozin's comment. Whether or not he would have, we can't play the what-if game. Just in general, I'm not a fan of the what-if game, but the firebenders harnessed such incredible power from that comet. Even as powerful as airbending is, how much of a difference would he have made?
I don't think any at all. And if you just think about science and chemistry, is it? I have no idea. But air makes fire bigger. You blow air at fire, it makes it bigger.
Well, there you go. So that's the story of Aang. But this whole episode juxtaposes the story of Aang with the story of Zuko. We see Iroh walking in on the lieutenant, pretty much jabbing Prince Zuko for being selfish and sacrificing the safety of the crew just so we could search for the Avatar. And then Iroh walks in, and we learn about the story of Zuko, because Iroh wants to defend his nephew and explain what exactly it is that makes him behave the way he does. So we pivot back to when Zuko was 13 years old. He was going into a war meeting, and Iroh allows Zuko to go in when the guards would not. And Iroh makes Zuko promise not to speak, because the soldiers, the generals, can be very tenacious. So they talk about this plan where a general will send the 41st Division of the Fire Nation Army to take down an Earth Kingdom battalion. The general admits that the army does not stack up with the Earth Kingdom battalion. They will be used as a distraction, as a bait, while their stronger division comes in and swoops. Zuko called him out and said that you can't abandon our own people. That's treason to just throw our own soldiers out there to die. And Iroh admitted Zuko was correct. He was right. But it wasn't his place to speak up. And the Fire Lord was furious, said that Zuko was disrespectful towards the Fire Nation and to him. But when you dissect that plan, Zuko was right. It's a horrible plan. And it shows just how ruthless the Fire Nation is. They would sacrifice a division of their own just so they could snatch a victory.
I could just imagine what was going through Iroh's head when that plan was discussed. Like, even though like his reaction to what the plan wasn't too bad, but Iroh just lost his young son. This fresh meat that this general was sending in was probably the same age his son was when his son died. So, like, you just have to think about it. Like, all of these people being sent basically to their deaths, and the way that I see this plan went through. They did this plan.
Probably did.
Even though Zuko said not to, they probably did. And you just have to think about all of the sons and daughters of people who died. Obviously, the sons and daughters of all these high-ranking generals, of course, wouldn't get pushed into this war. So it was people who were expendable. They didn't mean much to the Fire Nation. So it's just crazy the length they would go to succeed in this war.
So then we see Zuko in the battle chamber anticipating battling the general he disrespected. But apparently, because it was in the Fire Lord's chamber, Zuko would have to face the Fire Lord, his father, which is so messed up. You can't even begin to describe how messed up this whole thing is. And Zuko refused to fight his father, and he bowed down to his father, apologizing, meaning no disrespect, begging for mercy. And Ozai gave him no mercy and demanded that he will fight for his honor. And Zuko refused because he will not fight his own father. And then the Fire Lord recited this line, which is incredibly scarring. You must learn respect, and suffering will be your teacher. And then that's the moment that Iroh looked away, and that's the moment that Zuko had his right eye burned for the rest of his life.
It's also the moment that we see Zhao get excited that this happened.
And Azula. You could see their faces captured with joy to watch the Prince of the Fire Nation be burned like this. Let's talk about that for a second, because this is a 13-year-old boy. And you see a chamber, including maybe the commander at the time, and the Fire Lord Princess, the Fire Princess, and they look thrilled and excited that the only thing missing is popcorn, that they're watching a 13-year-old boy get burned by the Fire Lord. That speaks to how toxic and evil this nation is.
Just to think about it, the basis of an Agni Kai is a fight to the death, right? And honestly, this, of course it didn't happen. Zuko's still alive. I think if Zuko would have fought, his father would have killed him. The only reason why he didn't kill him is because he was shielding himself, and I honestly think Ozai has some sort of sympathy inside of him, so he wouldn't kill a defenseless kid. But it's just ruthless what an Agni Kai is. I mean, obviously it's for honor and everything like that, but to challenge your own son.
And to just rub salt into the wound, because Zuko refused to fight, he had shown shameful weakness, and he was banished from the Fire Nation. And he was sent to capture the Avatar, and only then could he return with his honor. The problem is, this was 3 years before Aang awoke from the iceberg. At this point, the whole world assumed the Avatar was gone forever. The Avatar vanished. There's no reason to believe the Avatar is out there, which shows just how much Ozai underestimated Zuko, that he would send him out on a mission that could not be completed. It was Mission Impossible. It could not happen. But Ozai sent him to do it. Unbeknownst to him, the Avatar awoke 3 years later, and then Zuko and his mission was alive and well. But we learn how the Avatar gives Zuko hope that he'll go back home one day, and that he'll see his father again, and that his father will embrace him and love him again. It's so painful and excruciating to watch. It's emotionally painful to see this entire sequence and learn just how painful of a background Zuko has. And for the first time in the show, we actually feel bad for Zuko.
Yeah, seeing all of this pain he was going through and finally understanding why he urged so much to get the Avatar. Honestly, I think this right here is a point where Zuko changed from being like the villain to being another main character in just the way he did it. And especially right at the end, when they were in the storm and Zuko saw Aang. He saw Aang and Appa right at the end of the episode, and he decided to let them go. And he also did this when, in previous episodes, when he had to go rescue Iroh. So these two instances, and of course the background we just got, really shows that Zuko isn't so much a villain. He's kind of a victim in this show.
I like to think of this show, and I learned a lot about this when I rewatched the show when Netflix released it a few months ago. Avatar is a collision course between Zuko and Aang. It's the intersection of two people and their destinies coming together. You have the Avatar who vanished for 100 years, and you have Zuko, the banished prince of the Fire Nation. But their destinies are intertwined with each other. And this show sets the stage for two characters who intersect in so many ways. And just the juxtaposition of Aang's story and Zuko's story shows that Zuko is not the villain we thought he was. He has depth beyond most villains. He has immeasurable depth beyond Commander Zhao, the Fire Lord, anybody else in the Fire Nation that we know, who we know as the face of the Fire Nation, the man with the scar, the bald man with the ponytail. He's not just a man who's trying to destroy the world and destroy the world's last measure of hope. He's trying to go back home, and he's trying to get back with his father and feel loved again.
That longing to go back to somebody who sent him away, honestly, I think it's related back to Zuko's mother and the way that, like, Zuko's mother was his rock, and when Ozai basically took her away from him, that really sent him downhill. And honestly, I think when Zuko is away for 3 years, he just wants to be sent back 5 years in the past and be sent back to when he was actually happy. Because like in this entire show, I don't think Zuko's ever really happy.
He's never happy. That is it for this episode. Happy Halloween. It will be Halloween by the time you listen to this, or it will be November. If it is November, vote. Be safe. Have a great weekend. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Avatar State of Mind. We'll be back next Saturday with episode 9. Please follow us on Instagram at Avatar State of Mind and Twitter at Avatar SOM for more content and to get sneak peeks at episodes before they release. If you have any recommendations for a future episode, please tweet us or comment on any of our Instagram posts. This podcast is now available on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. For Sam DeCoste, I am Aaron Miller, and thanks again for listening to this episode of Avatar State of Mind.